Hi, my name is Ciara Gorman. I'm a first year PhD student at Queen's University Belfast in the Department of French. My research focuses on the representations of female villainy in 21st century French crime fiction. I've been fascinated by crime fiction my whole life. I grew up reading Agatha Christie, watching detective serials on TV, playing Cluedo. This might be relatable because crime fiction, in all of its multimedia forms, from film to TV to podcasts, is attractive to many people. In France, crime fiction is an institution. In 2014, one in every five novels sold there was a polar, a crime novel, and sales of crime novels account for around 17% of all novels sold per annum in France. The crime novel, like the genre itself, is wonderfully diverse, and all of its subgenres are popular in France. From the classic roman policier or detective novel, to historical mysteries to noir thrillers. General literature has also been infiltrated by crime tropes, as they make appearances in books that are not technically or typically classified as crime fiction. Several of these crime subgenres are represented in the corpus of my thesis. I'm working with 4 books, the covers of which you can see here on this slide, all published in the last kind of 10 years or so. Vargas is one of the most popular and prolific crime fiction authors in France, same with Karine Gibel. And Pierre Lemaitre, who wrote Alex in 2011, is a Prix Goncourt laureate, and so is Leila Slimani, who won the same prestigious prize in 2016 for this novel, Chanson douce. All of these novels tell different stories. All of them have different generic forms, but they're all united by one character, a female perpetrator. That character too exists on a scale in these novels. In one, she's a serial killer, in another, a murderer of children. She's a young woman, an old woman, a nanny, a professional assassin. I'm interested in 3 specific aspects of the representation of these female criminals in these novels: why and where they commit crime, and what imagery is associated with them. My thesis currently has a 4-part structure. Chapter 1 evaluates the role of villains, Chapter 2 is about motives, 3 and 4 are about place and imagery, respectively. So, Chapter 1 evaluates the role of villains and of villainy itself in crime fiction. Villains are really an integral part of any narrative. They throw the heroine's goodness into relief by their badness, and their evil deeds are often the motor that kind of propels the story forwards. Their actions cause us to reel back in horror, and yet we are compelled to keep looking. This is right at the heart of what makes crime fiction itself so popular. Mark Leitz describes it as a simultaneous process of attraction and repulsion. If you've ever watched a crime drama where a murder or a dismemberment or a kidnapping is shown, you'll know what I mean. You want to look away because it's uncomfortable, but you can't because it's part of the story, and you want to know how the story ends. This sort of morbid fascination with villains in crime fiction can be increased when the perpetrator is a woman, because it's not what we might be used to seeing. We need only look at the popularity of shows like Killing Eve or Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl as evidence. We know that fictional characters often reflect or interrogate societal realities and teach us lessons about how to be in the world. That's why we talk about characters as role models or as examples of what not to do. So, what do female villains specifically have to say about issues like gender, justice, policing, capitalism, desire, hatred, love? What messages do we, the reading public, glean from their behavior as we unconsciously evaluate it for tips, tricks, limitations, warnings, as we do with all characters in fiction? These are the questions at the heart of my thesis, questions about representation, feminism, fiction, and reality. In Chapter 2, I want to look at the motives assigned to our female perpetrators. Put simply, why do they commit their crimes? The answer is double in the 4 books I'm looking at: vengeance and breakdown. In Alex and Console la Recluse, our female villains murder 6 and 10 people respectively as an act of vengeance for unspeakable abuse that happened to them in the past, vengeance that was long in the planning and exquisite in the execution. In Chanson douce, Louise, our perpetrator, murders the children that she cares for as a result of a breakdown in her mental health, which has slowly been collapsing over the course of the novel. Louise's motives for murder have as much to say about capitalism and the exploitation of care workers and motherhood as they do about crime. None of our female villains have simple reasons for murder. this is part of what makes their characters so complex. In chapter 3, I shift my focus to the places associated with female villains in the novels. Where do they commit crime? What spaces do they move through, and what can we learn from this? There are 3 important places to consider in my corpus: the carceral space, the domestic space, and the city. In the hard-boiled crime novel, the city, in its anonymity, its violence, its corruption, is as central a character to the story as the private eye. In Alex, the anonymity of the city harms her when she's kidnapped right off the street, and it's almost impossible for the police to track her down amongst all the tens of people who go missing in cities every day. Later, that same anonymity hides her when she's trying to escape detection by those very police. This is particularly striking when we consider that Alex is a woman, and the city is so often coded as dangerous to women. But here, Alex is the danger. She's as anonymous and unpredictable as the city itself, and that's a significant element in how we understand her as a villain. Finally, there's chapter 4, which will examine the particular imagery associated with each of our female perpetrators. A great example here is Irene, the villain in Consort la Recluse. She is closely linked to the image of the recluse spider, not only because her weapon of choice happens to be spider venom, but because she remains mostly out of sight in the novel, lurking in the background in her web of deceit. What can we learn from this association between spiders and women, a long-standing one with its roots in Greek mythology, resurging now in contemporary crime fiction? How does the animalization of Irene contribute to her character as a woman seeking justice outside of the law? This leads me to the larger questions which inform my research work. We might use this particular notion of the vengeful woman as an example, because Alex and Irene are taking long-planned revenge against a group of people who participated in their rape, assault, and prostitution as young children. Does that knowledge change how we think about their crimes and about their likely punishment? I think it does. And this is significant considering that how we deal with allegations of historical sexual abuse is a topic that's very much in the limelight right now. Engagement with this issue in contemporary crime fiction is channeled through the figure of the female villain who is also a survivor of abuse. This is what Collia and Pasolini describe as the two-way traffic between crime fiction and real life. As the fiction draws its inspiration from real-life crime, criminals, and general society, so we learn to think differently about that real life through engagement with the fiction. And so these contemporary female villains seem to push us beyond the film noir stereotype of the beautiful, deadly, but shallow femme fatale. They push us into the territory of philosophizing on what justice looks like, what a society that continually disbelieves and denigrates women who speak up about sexual violence has to reckon with when those same women decide to seek their own kind of recompense outside of a system that pays only lip service to the ideals of equality and the zealous pursuit of justice that it claims to uphold. It's my firm belief that these characters move the dial in discourses about justice and accountability in crime fiction, and that we need to pay attention to where the needle is now pointing.